Hi everybody, it's so wonderful to have you here. I'm going to be talking about a book and a film and a television series. And I think the trajectory from serious to bubblegum back to slightly serious is what's interesting to me. And it's all about the adaptation of something and how the true person's story can get lost along the way. And I believe TV allows the chance to tell longer stories. You can tell 100 hours in the life of a person instead of 2 hours. And so I think we're going to end up discovering that TV was the better place for this story to house itself. So I'm talking about Gidget. So we're at the SRN conference. We're very excited about that. And because we're thinking fact and fiction, that's why I came to this. My title is very long. I laugh about that. So we'll get to it. So it's how Gidget got into the girl ghetto. And I'm sorry to use that word, but it is a negative word in the United States. But I like the alliteration of girl ghetto. And I think it's a real problem because you'll see, of course, the film began, the adaptation began as a film, starring Sandra Dee. And as far as Americans are concerned, Sandra Dee is kind of a bubblegum, cutesy pie, blonde with no real serious, nothing but the superficiality of her being cute and a babe on the beach, right? And so that's what I was thinking about when I thought about doing this. And it came to me that it's TV that gave her groove back. So I should have shrunk the title, but it was too late for the publication. And it's because of this woman, Ruth Brooks Flippin, who was the television writer who did the adaptation for television. And frankly, I had never heard of her. There are a lot of female writers in Hollywood that never get exposure. And so this shocked me. These are photographs. More likely I was to find her online with her husband because he was an actor in the period. So she is more known as Jay Flippin's wife than she is as an executive producer of television in her own right. And after she got through with Gidget, she's going to do a lot of interesting things. Along the way, we're going to talk about gendered writing and how scripts became different when a man wrote an episode of Gidget versus when a female did, which I did not think would happen, and yet is exactly what I discovered along the way. Sadly, when women write women, they give them jobs and make them educated and smart. And when men write women, they often don't give them jobs and they have them shop a lot, which doesn't seem to suit me as a definition because I really don't like shopping. So this is what I'm going to look at. Now, this piece of dialogue really made me cringe. I have to read it for you. Yeah, I'll go, oh, why would a girl ever say that about her own life? And yet, this was a line given to Gidget by a male writer. So this is something I found along the way. As far as the adaptation of Gidget, it all began with an actual real girl and her real words. Kathy Kohner was a Jewish young girl. Her father was a television writer. She lived in Beverly Hills. And one summer in her year between 16 and 17, she went to the beach every day and discovered this community of surfing males, no girls allowed. And she didn't fall in love with the boys, she fell in love with the sport. And what really bothered me was that is what her book is about. How hard she tried to be such a good surfer, the men would take her seriously. And instead, when it turns into a film, you see what happens. So it all started with the real woman. This is the real woman in the modern day. She's still alive. She works in, she works as a maitre d' of a restaurant in Malibu, right? And she's still known as the real Gidget. That's kind of her. Everyone in Hollywood is a bit of a celebrity, so you can go to that restaurant and meet the real Gidget and have dinner, which is pretty funny. She also did a documentary a few years about her life that traveled the festival circuit. She's trying to bring back the real story out of all the Hollywood glitz and glamour. So that's Kathy Kohner. And this was said about the book in the introduction, which I found very interesting, and this is what connected me to it, that when it came out, there was a thought that this was essentially a female Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye being the J.D. Salinger book that every high school student in America is still made to read. And I don't understand, it's about a kid who decides whether or not to go to a hooker. And I'm not really sure why that's the most important book for teenagers to read. And yet we don't read books about girls coming of age. And Gidget turns out to be just such a thing, about a woman who goes to the beach to learn a skill. Yes, she meets some boys along the way, and of course she finds one or two of them handsome, but she also makes choices about whether or not to have sex. And that is a huge moment in the coming of age of a girl. Nobody takes advantage of her, which tends to be the way the story goes. She makes a choice, and the men respect her for it. And I thought that was fascinating when I read this book, right? So Hollywood gets a hand of this book, and they have to do something with it. They have to make it silly. So in the real world, this is what she has to say. This book is all about how much she loved surfing. And that's a picture of the real Kathy Kohner back in the day with her surfboard. That is how she identified herself. We get to the movie, and this is some typical dialogue. Yeah, the cringing can start anytime you want. It really hurt me to watch these generations of women discuss the business of being a woman, and they're dismissing her skill entirely.
Which year is the film? In which year it was done, the film, sorry?
What year? What year? Oh, the film is 59. Thank you, sorry. Yes, 1959. We're going to move into the 1960s with the next two sequels and then the show. So this is typical when a guy writes it. And also the difference between the book and the films. In the book, she has a friend who's an aspiring playwright. Gidget herself is reading Rachel Carson, because Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was about how we were affecting the environment, and the environment means everything to her because that's where the surf is, right? In the movie, she doesn't read, because that's a boring thing for a girl to do. Her father's a professor. In the movie, he's kind of a sitcom goof-off. He's actually played by Carl Reiner in one of the sequels. She wants to learn to surf. That's her character want, if we're scripting this story. In this, she wants a boyfriend. Yeah, I mean, entirely take away the thing that makes her special and different. And in the book, she makes all the decisions about her own life, as I said, including whether or not to have sex with a really cute surfer. In the movie, her boyfriend makes all the decisions about whether or not they'll be together. And I didn't even think about that until I watched all the sequels, and I kept waiting, and it was always him breaking up with her and her waiting for him to come back to her. I thought, oh, this is just disgusting and sad and scary in many ways. Yeah, I went too far, sorry. This really struck me too. In the book, this is her conclusion, her definition of who she is. The summer with Jeff could have been just a dream, but with the board and the sun and the waves, it was for real. Maybe I was just a woman in love with a surfboard. It's as simple as that. That's literally the thesis of her own book. In the movie, it was getting pinned by her boyfriend, which was the absolute ultimate moment in her life. I mean, you can't water it down any more than that. It fascinates me, and yet this is the mythology that is known about Gidget, and it's not her true story at all, which really makes me sad. I also noticed in watching all the movies, first of all, the girl playing Gidget changed in every film. So it wasn't even like we cared that she had to be the same woman. She was just this image. And the boy stays the same. James Darren plays Moondoggy in all three of these films. So it turns out to be a trilogy about the life of a boy who surfs and has an ever-changing girlfriend with the same name. I mean, this is not at all what I expected to find when I came to this. And he sings music. So then we get Ruth Brooks Flippin, who shows up. And Ruth, she writes a bit of Gidget Goes Hawaiian, and she does Gidget Goes to Rome. The second one is kind of silly and dumb. I'm hoping that means the studio had choices about what got done. And when it was successful enough, she had more of her own power in the third sequel, where suddenly Gidget's in college. She reads books again, just like the actual first book. And she makes some more interesting decisions. So we'll see. This one was written largely by Gabriel Upton. And we have the Gidget who needs help and has to ask and is always worried about things, and she cries, which is always the thing girls go to when they have to be dramatic. When we get over to this one, which is co-written with Catherine and Dale Yunson, again, she's in college, suddenly her vocabulary popped up. The woman knew 3-syllable words that she used with her friends, as normal and casual as you could be. She quotes Shakespeare and Dante's Inferno, because her father is a professor of literature, so that is the culture of her home, which is actually true. And she was very proud of her independence in that film. So as Ruth Brooks Flippin gets a hold of the character, she starts to mold her back into who she was in her original book. So then we come to the television show, which stars Sally Field. This was her first major job. She'd never done a film or anything large before. So she is the active character within every episode, which is the thing that we do in television. So maybe that helped Ruth bring the story back to being about Gidget's decisions. I don't know, but I'm sure that contributed to it. And later in her career, Flippin is going to write these other plucky women, that girl being the first single woman on television to live without her parents and have a career. We always think about Mary Tyler Moore, who did that, but it's that girl who did it first. Her career was acting, so that wasn't taken quite seriously, but she lived on her own and she supported herself, right? And Bewitched, who of course had the power of magic and always ended up saving the day for her husband. And I would say you could maybe say the Brady Girls had some power in their life, right? They brought Davy Jones into their world, so that was a big deal. So I think it's interesting she always wrote female characters that are well remembered. So some differences right away. We see on the TV show, in the pilot that Ruth wrote, Gidget makes all the decisions. The show is built around the father-daughter relationship. So it's a much more, the father takes his daughter seriously. They speak as equals in terms of education and making choices in her life. Nothing, and that didn't happen at all in the films. She has a sister in the films, where she has a mother in the other film. In the TV show, she has a sister. The sister makes the mistake of reading Gidget's diary. And when Gidget describes the beautifulness with which she melted into the sand, the sister assumes it means she had sex at the beach. And she tells the dad, and the dad yells at the older sister for stepping into her younger sister's privacy, that she didn't have a right to read her diary. That was her private words. The dad is not worried that she had sex. He's worried that her privacy was invaded. And that's such a respectful stand between a father and a daughter. They come later to realize that melting into the sand is a description of surfing. So it all turns itself around. But that's the story of the pilot. Whereas in the films, you didn't have the sister, the parents were just goofballs, and as I said before, Moondoggy, the boy, made all the decisions. So right away in the pilot, we get a Gidget who has power and is moving forward in her life. So Ruth is bringing back the real character from the book. I think Ruth is a pretty funny writer. I didn't realize this until I watched all her episodes. She names some of Gidget's friends. And she gets away with the double entendre in American television. I'm not sure how she got away with that in the 60s. And her sister, in one episode, calls all Gidget's friends 16-year-olds. So it's kind of amazing what she got away with, if you ask me. And I can see that she's being ironic and she's kind of sliding into what people think. So the other important thing about the TV show is surfing is ever present. She is almost always going to the beach to surf with the men and to get better and better at surf season. Even here, I love doing her homework at the beach on her surfboard. We do not forget that that is the definition of Gidget. Now we think about the gendered writing that happened. In this case, an episode written by Irma Kalish, who was very famous, and Austin was her husband at the time. This whole thing focuses on her having to write a paper. She's not doing well until she writes about what she knows, which is surfing. And when she does that, she gets the A's she needs in the class. She's very interested in her grades. She's not a fluffy, superficial girl. She wants good grades. She wants to go to college. She takes her work seriously. And that impressed me. I also think there's a little genre I want to do some studies on eventually. How many movies actually are the story of writers finding their own voice? Right? The Little Women stories are really not about little girls playing in their house in New England. It's about one woman discovering her voice with the successful telling of her family stories. I think there's a million films and stories that end up being about writers finding their voice. So, you know, we are writing about what we know all the time. Also in this episode, talk about surfing. She eats, sleeps, and drinks it. She says to her dad, you do the same thing. Why should it be wrong that I have something I'm obsessed with being better at? And he agrees with her. So she's able to debate with her father, and they have this very equal relationship, which makes me interested. This particular episode, she brought her dad to the beach to see what was so good about surfing. He met a girlfriend who was a research chemist. A woman writing the episode makes the woman not a widow, not some little girly job. She's a research chemist that he's going to go out with. His last girlfriend was the dean of female students at UCLA. Every woman you meet on this show, if the episode's written by a woman, is a woman with a substantial career and an interesting person. That fascinates me. But then you switch over, you get an episode written by a gentleman, and you see, basically she wants to buy this car off one of the surfers on the beach so she has the ability to go back and forth without bugging her friends for a ride. She decides to go to shop class at school to learn how to take care of the car before she buys it, where these things are all annoying to me. When a woman clamors about being equal to men, sometimes giving them exactly what they want convinces them they don't want it. That's the teacher's way of getting her to quit the class. And he spends the entire episode giving her terrible, dirty, heavy, awful jobs in the auto shop so that she will quit. Right? And she never does, but at the very end, she comes up with this message. She got the car fixed because she stood outside and looked helpless. And that was the lesson she learned in an episode written by a man. So as far as I'm concerned, he took the character a few steps backwards in the midst of this growth period. I find that so sad. You flip back to Flippin'. And now she's taking her friend seriously. This friend, LaRue, is being bullied at school, so talk about an interesting theme that is still very prevalent, right? And it's her friend, Gidget, who stands by her and doesn't care what the other girls think. You're still my friend. It's because LaRue likes to ride horses more than she wants to get a boyfriend. And the girls don't respect her for that. So again, a girl interested in a sport that she wants to be better at. That's the kind of friend Gidget wants to have, not a friend who goes shopping and, you know, kisses boys all the time. So she takes care of her friend, the dad helps out, which I think is really pretty, and in the end, again, we go back to, as long as a girl's got something to love, all's right with the world. It can be an ocean, a horse, a friend, or incidentally, a boy. Men are not the most important catch in her life. So I think that's really cool, written by a woman in the TV show. Backwards again, we go to a boy writing a show. The boyfriends always wait to the last minute to call the girls for a date because they have to see if there's good surf. If there's good surf, they won't call them for dates. Gidget decides that's being treated disrespectfully. We should all make a plan to do something else, so when the boys call last minute, we're busy. So they do that, they have a sleepover party at her house. The problem is the girlfriends all get calls from their boyfriends and they leave the party. Better to be with boys than to be with their girlfriends, right? So her plan fails, which is kind of sad. And at the end, this is her weak-ass lesson. As far as courtesy and respect, if a boy meets you halfway, that's good enough. I don't understand how that, you know, and I love guys, right? Hello, I'm married to a guy, I have a son, but what is this writing women as little weak girls? It's very sad. Then you flip over here to Dorothy Cooper Foote, who was one of the freelance writers on the show. Gidget has a crush on an older man, that's Daniel Cervantes, who'll show up in Hill Street Blues as a grown man. He's a photographer, he's a war veteran from the Vietnam War, though that war is unmentioned, but he's a war veteran. And he's taking pictures of her for a magazine. She falls in love with him. She discovers he actually has a fiance. He didn't realize she had a crush on him because he didn't consider a younger girl somebody that he would go after. And her and her dad had this lovely moment because he says, you're always going to hurt a little. And he knows because his wife has passed away. So he's a widow. So they make this connection on having experienced loss together, which is a very mature thing for a young girl and her father to be able to discuss and to share. And again, that mature attitude toward her comes from a female writer. So enough thoughts about gender writing. I could do a whole, I didn't realize I was going to go down that path when I started, but it seemed to be where the stories were leading me, right? So I really wanted to wrap up with the idea of, so where did we get the Gidget book right? Was it in the movies or was it in the TV show? I'm going to guess just because I'm pushy and that's what I pushed on you. It is, in fact, the TV show. And I'm going to say that's because TV is where meat and potatoes of stories can be told. We have 100 or 200 hours to tell you the story of one character. They can't be weak and superficial or you won't come back. We need to really get into their hearts and care about them. And that's the beauty of television as opposed to bubblegum in films. And also TV has often been, and I'm not saying Gidget is part of the golden age of television, but when we discuss the golden age of television, we discuss it like Dickensian novels, that every month, every week, you get another section of the story. And that's the power of television. We can expand on a character because you've come to love them and you'll watch them go through 2 or 3 or 7 years of their life. And that's much more in depth than you can get into a film, which is where Gidget falls apart, if you ask me. So we take it all the way around back to the actual Kathy Kohner and her actual father who wrote the book, which I think was really beautiful. And I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that Gidget matters. This happens to be my favorite phrase right now, because last year I did my presentation of my book about the monkeys, why the monkeys matter, wherein I found some feminist ideology in that program about 4 boys who run a rock band. And so I think it's important. I stole the title from this book, Why Sinatra Matters. I didn't write that, I just stole the title. But it's a very interesting look at Italian Americans and how Sinatra is the reason they became less minority and more accepted in America. So this business of matter is important. And in the 60s, Gidget mattered. She became a role model for girls, whether it was the Sandra Dee version or in television, whether it was the Sally Field version. And so you've got all kinds of articles in magazines. There's a Gidget board game. I didn't know people did that until we had Monopoly Simpsons, right? Records were sold, the songs from the movies, and of course, the hairstyle. It's always about some girl every generation whose hair all the other women have to have, right? It wasn't just Jennifer Aniston did it first. So she was important in the 60s. because of the movies, the TV show was forgotten because the movies reran, but the show didn't. And so they went back to the bubblegum, if you know Grease, you know the line. Sandra Dee's lousy with virginity. And so everybody thinks of Gidget as something that is not very valuable, and I think that's a problem. But she is very influential in television and film. Gadget Hackwrench is a Disney character. They claim she's based on this character from the movie Real Genius. But look at that picture. Don't tell me she's not Sally Field. There's no way she's not Gidget. So I think that's really interesting, right? So her effect on culture is still with us. In The Secret Life of Pets, they named the little puffy thing Gidget, because they're still thinking of the superficial character. So it's very hard for Gidget to get her groove back, if you ask me. And I would argue that the whole Bridget Jones' Diary world is really kind of a modern version of what they thought Gidget was, but Bridget Jones has an all messed up life. And it's kind of sad that we have, the only way we see a girl in her diary nowadays is this messed up girl, who again is picking between two men, and that's the whole core goal of her life, is to pick right between these two men, which is fascinatingly sad to me. Sally Field herself had to overcome the puffy bubblegumness of Gidget. Took her a while, but she did. We all know she won 2 Oscars. She's famous for saying, "You like me, you really like me," when she got her 2nd Oscar. She most recently was nominated for playing Mrs. Lincoln in the movie Lincoln a few years ago, and she got a star on the Walk of Fame. So she has pulled through, and I think her quality helps us go back and look at the fact that the Gidget TV show was actually a quality TV show for back in the day. And if you know anything about the famous Last Effable Day sketch, when these women all talk about how actresses have the last moment in their career where casting directors consider them effable, what do? You push them out into a little boat in the water, and it's like a Viking funeral. When they do this with Julie Louis-Dreyfus, the boat has "Sally Field was here" printed inside it. So we're bringing back the idea that she was treated incorrectly, but we're now taking her more seriously. In the real world, Gidget was the #8 most important surfer in America. That's how important she was in the surfing world, and again, that's the real Gidget over there, and Duke Kamehameha, who is the most important surfer in the world. So my leaving to you is that this year on International Surfing Day, who knew there was an International Surfing Day? In some countries it's on the 17th of June, and some it's on the 20th. Whatever day it is in your country, I suggest you pick up a copy of Gidget and actually read what the woman had to say about herself.
Thank you so much.
Wow.